Good morning and welcome to Cobra Quickies. No, I take that back. I'm not doing a Cobra Quickie today. I'm doing Tales from Classic Motor Carriages. I believe where we stopped off last time, we were discussing the Cabriolet and how it came into being. The Cabriolet being the first book I wrote for Classic Motor Carriages, and I had a lot of input onto that design. One of the things I want to say about the parts that we use, I don't have one in front of me, but bear with me. There were no mechanical drawings done to show how to make the parts. The parts were actually made from samples. We built samples. We gave them to the metal shop, and the metal shop turned them into parts to go on the cars. Now, that's a pretty neat way of doing things. Definitely unique in that we were fabricating the parts without any sort of design from a designer or a bureau or even some guy who could sketch something onto a piece of drafting paper. By the way, I can. I don't do a lot of drafting anymore, but I do have the ability to draw, or at least did once upon a time, many, many years ago. So, what we were talking about the Cabriolet. The Cabriolet is the first of the new form books. Um, we had a previous version of the 34 Coupe, and the 34 Coupe had the original style of the um, boxes that you checked off. As you went along and built the car, you would check a box that whenever you completed the task. Um, it worked well for the little cars. The little cars were a lot simpler and easier to do, but when we started to get to the more complex cars like the Cobra and the Coupe and the Vicky, and some of the other ones that we don't talk about, it there was a decision made to redesign the way the books were done. I was the guy that basically sat down and wrote the books, and I wrote them in the manner that you would expect to come across if you were working on a helicopter and you had a manual from, say, Sikorsky or Bell Helicopter that basically told you how to do things. And this included things like warnings, cautions, there were tips and stuff like that. And they were basically separated from the things, or separated from the normal build text. And that's why when you're working on the code, you'll come across a warning that says, don't do this, or this is not advised, or something like that. That's purely me telling you not to do it. And that's part of what I incorporated into the manual for the Cabriolet, which also worked into the Cobra. Also, I designed a harness for the Cabriolet instead of the previous two harnesses, which was the harness for the original Coupe and the harness for the first iteration of the Vicky. Now, the reason these two vehicles were separate from the later versions is, one, they both had the small car manuals, and you can tell if you had a small car manual if your Vicky or your Coupe called for a forged steering column. After the Cabriolet, all our steering columns, all the columns that we intended to use on our vehicles, were going to be GM columns, which eventually led to companies like Flaming River and some of the other ones producing aftermarket GM columns, sand switch, okay, that you could put on your car. If you had a 65 Mustang, you could put one of these in there. If you had a 49 Ford pickup, you could put one in there. And they made quite a business of it. And we saw, I'd like to say we saw that coming when we were building the Cabriolet. We looked at the Cabriolet and we said, you know what, we have to use that column in there because it's much nicer. It's easier to assemble. It looks cleaner. It has all the switches and stuff like that attached to the column, or you could turn on the wipers, or you could turn on the cruise control, or you could turn on the headlights, depending on which version you got. And that made things a little bit easier. I don't think we ever used one with the headlight switch on the column, but we did use the ones that had the high-low beam on the column and had the wiper switch on the column as well. And that did a lot. That put a lot of that gave the operator, the builder, or whoever bought the car, the ability to control the wipers without trying to figure out which switch on the dash turn the wipers on. We actually had little decals you would put on your wooden dashboards. So we did away with the wooden dashboards in the small cars, and we went to fiberglass molded dashboards. We could have done a wooden dashboard on the Cobra, but it wouldn't have been as good. I'm not too happy with the final design of the dashboard for the Cobra, but it was one of those things. Now, one of the things we did with the Cabriolet is we built a hardtop for it. They are still out there. There are some people that have them and either haven't used them or wanted to use them and never did. So if you ever come across one and you have a Cabriolet, you want that hardtop, because the hardtop actually was better than the soft top and the way it attached to the thing. It used the same mounts as the hardtop or the soft top, but it was a lot easier to install and take off. The only problem we had with the original Cabriolets is what I call the 30-degree doors. The original doors on the Cabriolet only opened up about 30 degrees. And I'm sure some of you have seen pictures of me with the doors opened up only this far. That's because that's all they went. And when we built the Cabriolet, we took all the stuff we learned from building the Cabriolet and we incorporated it into the Vicky, and we built a whole new body for the coupe that would fit basically on the same frame as the Cabriolet. The Vicky frame is different, but it had the same sort of alterations to it that the Cabriolet did that caused us to have a simpler design that we could put out. The original coupe chassis, if you will, complete with the interior roll cage. We actually built one without a body so that we could show it off at car shows because it's quite sturdy and it was impressive. It looked like a sprint car without the body and the roll cage and stuff like that. Now, in a talk roll cage, we did not use chrome moly tubing. We use steel rod, and we use square tubing for that roll cage. And it was quite massive. The original coupe itself, we're going to I'm going to say original coupe whenever I'm talking about the original coupe versus the new coupe. The original coupe doors had one hinge, or had a hinge that was usable on both sides, which is something you definitely want to avoid at any cost when you're building a car. The doors would open up almost 90 degrees. That's why. Remember when I talk about the new Cabriolet, or the Cabriolet, we had the doors that had only 30 degrees of opening. Now, problem with that is that when we revised the Vicky and we revised the coupe to the new bodies and the new door hinges, because the door hinges would change, we had to use the same bracketry and door hinges that we used on the Cabriolet, and that gave the new coupe and the new Vicky doors that only opened up 30 degrees, which is a mess. Now, eventually we fixed it, or rather I fixed it. I had a customer out west, up in Washington State. He was a jeweler by trade. He was also paraplegic, and I wish I had pictures of this car because it was fantastic. But he decided that he was going to build a Vicky. He built it out of his wheelchair. One day, because he was on Kurt Scott's list of people that were not happy with the company, he somehow got onto it. And because he got onto it, Ben Harrington, the president of Classic Motor Carriages at the time, decided to give him to me to see if I could work with him. When I called him up, the first thing he said, Mike, I really don't have a problem with the car, per se. But the biggest problem I have is with the doors, because I'm in a wheelchair, and I was stunned. The Vicky to me, is considered one of the harder cars to build because it requires a lot of going in and out of the car, and putting things like the back seat area and the gas tank in through the inside of the car, and it can be a bit tough. Well, he had built the majority of the car without putting the doors on. And when it came time to put the doors on, he says, "No, there's no way I'm going to get into this." And that's kind of when he picked up on Kurt Scott, and eventually he got on the list of people that are unhappy with Classic Motor Carriages, and somehow his name was given to me to see what I could do for him. And they said, Mike, I really love the car. I'm happy with the build. I'm not happy with the back orders. I can do something about that. But I'm also not happy with the doors because I'm in a wheelchair. And I said, let me see what I can do. So what I did, and this is because we're talking out of school and stuff like that, is we're going to discuss how to make something work on the car and how I made it work on the car. Basically, I took and measured the door jamb. I know the dimensions of the hinge post. It's 2x2 square, and it goes straight up and down at the back of the door. And then there was the hinge. The hinge was like that, is an S-shape hinge. And it was made that way so that when you close the door, it wouldn't impact with the door jamb. And there was a very small opening that the hinge had to move through. Okay? And that opening was part of the reason that the doors only opened up 30 degrees. So what I did was I sat down and I drew a piece of paper. I drew the door jamb, I drew the door, and I drew the hinge. And I drew the hinge on a separate piece of paper, and I took the hinge, put a pen onto the paper so that I could see what the door was hitting onto. And I saw how it moved and stuff like that. Nobody that I know of. We always did this on in-house, and somehow during the development of the Vicky, which I was not involved in, is they came up with the S hinge as the way to do it. Unfortunately, the S hinge was the 30-degree hinge. You'll have to excuse my dogs. They see any bird that flies overhead, generally vultures, as a threat to their territory, and they go running out after them. But back to the old. Now, once I saw that, I looked down at this and said, how can I get this thing to move more freely? How can I get it to open up 90 degrees? Well, this was actually very simple. Door hinge post. I cut a section out of the door hinge post where the hinge would swing through it. Did not affect the durability of the hinge post. The hinge post was sturdy and is bonded to the body or secured to the body with rivets, depending on what you did. But cutting this area out allowed it to swing more open. But that wasn't the only thing I did. I also made it an L shape, like so. Okay? So that when it swung out, it would pass all the stuff between, or it would swing open until it came into contact with something. And doing this actually made a bigger hole, not too bad, and stuff like that. And I did this all on paper, just so I could present it to Ben Harrington. I take it into Ben Harrington and say, look, this is how I can set this guy up with hinges that open up 90 degrees. He's in a wheelchair. He needs these. Let me make a set. And let me prove that this works. And says, okay, you got a day. Went over to the metal shop, had metal shop make me up a set of hinges. Did not have them make me up a set of hinge posts. Now there's a reason why for this. I went over to Cabriolet. We know the Cabriolet already had the S hinges and they sucked. So what I did was I took the doors off the Cabriolet, put them on my table. I had a nice clean table with a carpet on it. And I laid the doors on there, took the S hinges off. Doors are actually fairly easy to remove. You just pull the pin and slide them forward, and they come off. So, got my trusty die grinder. Let me see if forget it. I'm not, well, yes I will. See that tip? You know that tip well. That's my door adjustment tip. That's the same tool I use to readjust those doors. That's true. I went in there, figured out where the opening was going to be. It was already opened a little bit, but when I went in there, I used this thing. I went in there and I cut the hinge post out with this thing. And then I went in there deep and I cut all the way in till I was just so I could put the L-shaped hinge in there. I did both sides all at the same time, because if it's going to work, it's going to work right the first time. We hope it did. Thank God. But I did that. Put the hinges back on. Went to Ben Harrington. Come on, I got to show you something. Yeah, pulled them off the phone. It's probably a really important phone call, but took them out to the factory. I had my own little area where I built cars and worked on all the showroom cars. That's also part of my job, was maintaining the showroom cars, because every time we sent them to shows, they came back missing parts and stuff like that. I can't help that. The people at car shows can be notoriously sticky fingered. Um, so we always made sure that when they came back, all the knobs were put back on, all the lighters were reinstalled. Yes, we had lighters in our cars. And anything that could have been removed by quick fingered people was put back to normal, and I washed them, waxed them, and got them ready for the next car show. But there was the cabriolet. Doors are closed. Walk up to the cabriolet. I actually had a switch underneath the running board. It's just a little push button switch. You could reach your toe up, hit the switch, and the doors would pop open. So I did. Boom. Door swings. 90 degrees. I closed the door, hit the switch again, 90 degrees. Went to the other side, did the same thing. Harrington was impressed. Says, Mike, I want to incorporate this in all of our cars from here on out. Just get rid of all the S hinges, and we're going to be doing this, write up an addendum, and I had to, for all the different cars. And we did. By this time, I actually had written a manual for the coupe, and the new coupe, and the new Vicky. But I had to write up a couple pages, and the pages got incorporated into the manual eventually. I don't know how. I don't have a copy of that manual, so I don't know when I put them in. I probably made some sort of addendum that went in the back describing the purpose of the new hinges. But all of our cars started going out with these hinges. So you're going to see, if you go to car shows and you run across classic motor Carriages cars, you're going to see basically three versions of the coupe. Okay, you're going to see the original version, which is not too hard to figure out because the wipers go above the windshield, and there's only one or two, depending on whether or not they use the second one. Then you're going to see the coupes with the S hinges. Now they're very easy to figure out which ones they are, because they have the wipers on the bottom of the windshield, because we use the Volkswagen wiper system, or the specially power windows wiper set up on the bottom, and it would have the S hinge, or the 30-degree door hinges on them. And then there's that third version of the coupe, which is the one that had the L-shaped hinges, and those are the ones that are, if you're going to try to get a coupe and you want a good coupe or a good cabriolet or a good Vicky, you want to find the one with the L-shaped hinges, because those are the ones that work out the best. And that gives you a full 90. Now, back to my original customer. Sent them out to him. He was ecstatic. He said they were, he really loved them. And I think that's about the time where he stopped being buddy-buddy with Kurt Scott. But he built a hell of a car. I have seen it in pictures. I don't have any pictures of it, but I have seen it in pictures. I knew it used to be on Classic Motor Car, or Street Beast used to have it on their website, and their website is now in the Wayback Machine, and I have tried to find the pictures of his coupe because I desperately want to have copies of them. And there's one other thing that he did that I thought was outstanding. He, in a moment of brilliance, And I'm telling you, and I worked with this guy. This guy was a brilliant man. Um, it's sad that he was confined to a wheelchair, but he was still a very smart person. I mean, I loved talking with him and having discussions on how to do things. Well, he figured out he could go one better. Now, this is the reason I want to find pictures of the car. He either incorporated the running board below the door into the door so that when he opened the door, it swung with the door, or it swung away underneath the car or up out of the way while he was getting into the car. It was really cool. I mention this only because I wish I had the pictures of it, because it was so neat and it was so well designed that I didn't know what to say about it. I wish, I over the years I've lost everything I've had from classic motor carriages, from all the different moves and stuff like that, moving from Miami to Tallahassee, and from Tallahassee to other places, and finally ending up in Georgia. And the only thing I got from classic, or have left from classic, is stuff I gave my father to hold on to. So my father could see what I was doing. I gave him books and I gave him magazines and showed him the cars and stuff like that. He would come and visit me at the factory, but my father had all this stuff. And as he was getting old and kind of he got to the point where he's giving away all the stuff he had collected from his children. And I do mean children in the plural sense. I have 10 brothers and sisters, whether you believe it or not. That's unimportant. But I do have 10 brothers and sisters. And he collected everything from all of us. And he had my manuals. And he had brochures that I had given him. And he had pictures of me at the factory. I remember one picture in particular. George Levin owned a replica of a 1929 or 20, somewhere in the 27 or something like that, Bugatti Royale. It literally built on a 1976 GMC motorhome. Asked me how I know that, because I had to work on it. And it had a 454 engine, and it ran on bus tires and would top out at 55 miles an hour. That was all she wrote. And I would drive this thing because I worked for Levin as a repairer of his vehicles. He also had a 56. He had a 56 Rolls Royce Cabriolet. It was a one-off body that had been custom built by Rolls Royce to have this drop top on the back and stuff like that. I worked on that. Whenever these cars needed to be worked on, I would go up to his house, pick them up, take them down to the factory, and park them in, of course, the area up front where, you could see them when you walk by, but the areas were generally, the floors were painted a gray, and the salesmen were not supposed to let people into the areas where I worked. I actually had 3 gray walls around my area. The floor was painted gray because when we didn't use it to build cars, we actually used it to take pictures of cars. We would park the car in different angles and have a model or whatnot. And we would take pictures of the car in the same area where it was built, which is a pretty cool thing. Anyway, um, so, and then they showed it to Levin. They showed the Cabriolet to Levin, and Levin was really happy with it, especially since I got to take off or mark off one of the guys that was with Kurt Scott. And basically, anytime I marked one off of that list, it was really a big thing for me. I didn't get any extra money for it. I didn't even get any credit for building the hinges, other than what I got. The hinges, the original hinges, the S-shaped hinge, was a bit of an embarrassment. And the guy who designed them didn't stay with classic motor carriages that long, maybe 3-4 years at the most, and then he was let go. Might have had something to do with him loading barrels of fiberglass resin. We're talking 55-gallon barrels of fiberglass resin into the back of a van and hauling it out of there at night for his side business, which was making those, oh God, those things that went, they were fiberglass sun visors that were literally bolted to the front of a truck over the windshield. And he also did the fender flares on trucks and stuff like that. And he was absconding with the materials to build those things. And he had his own little fiberglass shop down near the airport, which I have been to. Don't know if it's still there. I doubt it. But him and I were not always on the best of terms. As a matter of fact, he hated me. He had a good reason to hate me because I didn't listen to him, even though he was superior to me. I refused to listen to him and told him whatever I thought. And frankly, a lot of the times, the head of R&D would listen to me and say, you're right, Mike. Let's do it that way. By this time, the head of R&D had been passed over or has left, including the factory manager. The factory manager, the head of fiberglass, and the head of R&D all left at the same time, all related to things going missing. And stuff like that. But that's the tale of the street rod doors. You have basically 3 designs. You have the original coupe. You have the original Vicky. And then you have the improved L-shaped door hinges that went on all the cars after I had developed them and basically showed the metal shop how to make them. That includes the chopping of the door at the factory. It's a very simple process to do, or not the door, but the door hinge post. And once the metal shop knew the dimensions and stuff like that, they went boom, boom, boom every day. They'd pump out door hinges and door hinge posts like they were going out of style, and they were. Which leads me back to one of my original points. This classic never had any problems with stuff made in-house. The only time we had a problem with stuff made in-house was when the materials that we used to make them were not on hand. Other than that, we did a lot of neat stuff. We bought Zimmer's supplies. When Zimmer went out of business, we went up to Zimmer and we bought cars that had not been completed. Not the Golden Hawk, but the one they used, the one they built on the Mustang. We bought a Mustang that had been modified by Zimmer to be one of their cars. We didn't use it to build their car. Instead, they gave the engine, the transmission, and all the stuff that was on the chassis, which, by the way, we couldn't make into a Zimmer because we didn't have the molds. They gave it to me, and I used it to build the Cobra. I used it to build George Levin's Cobra, or what is also known as the Supercharged Cobra. I got that engine and that transmission out of a Zimmer car, and the first thing we did, and I'm getting into the Cobra. I didn't want to get into the Cobra today, but I'll do it anyway because we're going to eat up some time. When I got the car, it just took the engine out, took the rear axle out, took the drive shaft out, took the entire wiring system out of this car. And there was a reason for that, because I was going to turn that wiring into a Cobra harness for that particular car. And that includes all the EFI wiring that was inside the car. And I laid it out on the whole floor of the research and development. This is a different area in the back. Whenever we had cars we didn't want people to see, we had a room that they had previously used to build cars for to epoxy the fenders onto the classic Tiffany's and Destinies. We had that room, and we set that room up as an R&D. There was one little office over there, and that office is basically the size of a small closet, and that's where I had a small desk and had piles of magazines on the floor and no radio. And that's where I wrote the manuals for this. Well, I got the books from Ford, and there's a lot of books on the Mustang. I mean, when you think about the wiring harness for the EFI, and I sat with that harness and I went through every last wire, figuring out what its function was, what it did, and how to make it work on the car. And I just bang away, just boom, boom, boom. Let's look at this. It took me a month to figure out what wires to cut, what wires to save, how it would work, and what I needed to do. I did make a mistake. I made one mistake, and it's the same mistake you always make on fiberglass cars, which is if you have a computer and it's inside a car and the car's all fiberglass, you have to ground the computer, or else you get irregular signals to the computer, and it doesn't run. That's the easiest way to put it. Whenever you use electronic fuel injection on a car, you got to make sure that the computer is grounded and that everything that needs to be grounded to the frame is grounded to the frame. And after a couple of tries of figuring out what I had done wrong, I figured out there was just a lot of grounds that had to be added to that. But it wasn't that hard, and I did it, and we got it running. Now, the other problem I had with that particular car is that they originally did not want side pipes. True story. True story. I used the Mustang headers going into the Mustang exhaust, going under the car, with the Mustang catalytic converters and the Mustang the Mustang mufflers all the way to the back. Went all the way to the back of the car and went out underneath. Let's see if we can do that. Come on, Mike, you can do this. Out underneath the rear end, or the rear end of the car, not the rear axle, but the rear end of the car. And it sounded quite nice. It was not as loud or as it might have been, but it was sedate, and it didn't have any issues. So, of course, they threw me a curve. I said, Mike, we want to put side pipes on it. Put side pipes on it. What about the muffler and the cats and all? Just leave all that in there. We'll figure it out. It shouldn't be too much of a problem. It's okay. So at the end, where the muffler was, just before it got to the back of the car, and the exhaust pipe went out the back, and I did a 180 degree bend in a piece of aluminum, or not aluminum, but a piece of muffler pipe. Went straight up all the way past everything that was underneath there on the back, and then I went out the sides, and I went into the single pipe. I made a adapter that would put the exhaust out the single pipe, and I stacked 2 mufflers in it per side. Probably not the best thing I had, but I wanted to make sure it was nice and quiet. And it was certainly quiet. It was whisper quiet. It was also very hard to run because we essentially had enough exhaust underneath the car to do 2 cars, or to stick it out the back end another whole cobra's length of exhaust pipe. Remember, it went all the way to the back, turned around, went all the way to the front, turned around, and went out the side pipes. I don't have to tell you, that's a lot of exhaust. But and they weren't happy with that one there either. So I took a set of Cobra headers for a small block Ford, which we made, or we had made for us. Those were that was an outside gig, even though I made the originals, and we shipped them out to some company that made headers. I don't remember which. You'll forgive me for not knowing that, but and took that out, put a section in the middle between the headers and the side pipes. And the side pipes on this Cobra had 4 into 1, whereas the original small block Ford had a single tube. So where that single tube was at the end of the header, before we put it into 4 separate ones, we put a oxygen sensor bung in there. We put the oxygen sensor bung in there. We put the side pipes on. It worked fantastic. It was nice, crisp, loud, not too loud, but it breathed Cobra. Okay, and once your car breathes Cobra, you are automatically the kind of Cobra you want to know is out there. So that was that. And they took it out, and they drove it, and they loved it. So what can we do to make it faster? Oh, I know what we can do to make it faster. It's an EFI motor. Let's put a supercharger on it. It'll breathe just as well. The EFI motor will, the EFI sensors would pick up the difference in the pressure and all that, and adjust the gas, and it was god awful fast and god awful powerful, a lot more than it should have been. And we made one tiny mistake. We make a lot of tiny mistakes. We used the flexible accordion plastic piece that is part plastic, part rubber or whatever, that went from the air cleaner box to the the mass air sensor on the top of the manifold for the 5 liter. We used this rubber thing. Well, when we changed it, it no longer went to the air box. Remember, if we had, we did have an air box. Toss that thing too. But then we put it onto the supercharger, and we ran that hose, and then we ran a separate hose out to the front so we could use one of those oiled filters, a cone type, for that, and it worked pretty good. It worked pretty good until you were doing like 120 miles an hour on I-75, and the engine had revved up to a point where it was pumping so much air into the intake of the 5 liter, it was literally sucking that rubber hose closed, at which point the engine promptly shut down until it slowed down enough so that it expanded again and started back up and shut it down again. And we discovered that we needed to use a stainless steel pipe instead of the rubber thing to do this. Now, we didn't share all this with anybody, and probably people have run across the same problem and figured it out for themselves. But eventually we discovered that a lot of people in the industry just were putting 5 liter motors into their classic cars or into kit cars, were doing the same exact thing for some unknown reason, where they were using stainless steel pipes because they wouldn't suck shut. And they're still using stainless steel pipes and stuff like that today. I was watching a Robbie Layton video where he had, of all things, 2 superchargers on a ANC Pacer with some sort of Chevrolet engine. I think it was the LS1 or something like that. It was a big engine. And yeah, they made all the different pipes and the joints and all that stuff. But this has been Tales from Classic Motor Carriages. This is a bit long. I haven't been doing anything on the car because it's been really cold out here. Actually, my backside is freezing. I have this lovely heater right over here. Right here. It's a radiant heater, and it's keeping the front warm. Of course, I've been here for like almost 50 minutes, but the backside needs to be warm too. What you see behind me is visqueen, and I closed most of this down. I still have to work on it. It's very hard for me to work out in the cold because my arthritis gets the better of me, and I have some hip issues that I'm dealing with right now. I'm supposed to be getting an MRI to see how bad my hip is. If you made it this far, that's part of the bad news. I have been working on stuff, but just when I can. There. That's the plate that goes on the front of the footwell for this particular car. As you can tell, I've been polishing on it. I'm waiting for a polish that I ordered. Okay. I'm waiting for a polish that I ordered to come in so I can get that to a mirror finish. That's roughly an hour and a half worth of polishing. There's my buffer. See that black? That black is from polishing thing. I write it like this. Put it here on my bench and just polish away until it's got. There are some scratches on it. I don't know if I can polish through the scratches. I may have to break out the sander again and do a couple of steps on the sander to get the polish to work the way I want it to. Man, this is long. I know this is going to suck. Anyway. The next thing I'm going to talk about on Cobra, or Tales from Classic Motor Carriages, is the actual build of the Cobra. Look forward to that. I've kind of touched on it lightly today, but I want to go into a lot more detail on how we built it later on. I think you'll find it fascinating. I hope you will. I hope you find anything I have to say today fascinating. It gives you a little bit of clues onto the various DNA that went into your car. Nothing we did to build the car is not without thought. There's a lot of thinking and a lot of trial and error that goes into building a prototype. And most of you are only dealing with the end result, so you don't always know why things that we did on the prototype are the things that we did. And I'm trying to explain those as I can. Don't expect a lot of comment. If you comment, that's fine. If you don't enjoy these, tell me. I'm a big boy. I don't care. Turned 68 in December. Yeah, so I'd like to get my knowledge out there, and I'd like to share with people who eventually come in across one of our cars all the things that I know about them. I believe they are good cars. They had their issues. Their issues are not insurmountable. I'm trying to remember that word, is hard enough. There's nothing about this car that can't be built. I've always said that. And anybody who tells you otherwise has never built the car. It reminds me of a story for another day. But it's a doozy. And with that, it's Mike, over and out.